Hey friends, what's good? Derek here from BOM Socks with another day of BOM Bites, where we feast upon the words of Christ, one bite at a time. Yesterday I introduced you to this idea of the rebuild of the temple, which is found in Ezra and Nehemiah, and kind of compared it to the idea of what we need to do to rebuild our lives. If you got a damaged life, where do you start? And that is a really good question, because some of you are like, yeah, I've been through a lot of crazy stuff and I want to rebuild my life, but where do I start? Because it seems such like a daunting task. I know I introduced you yesterday, I showed you the picture of the Provo City Center temple, the tabernacle that was just gutted by fire, and then it was built into this beautiful temple. When you're looking at something like that, where do you start? Well, I like chapter 3 of Ezra because it really, I think, gives you an idea of where to start. Now, the chapter heading says the altar is rebuilt, regular sacrifices are reinstituted, and the foundations of the temple are laid amid great rejoicing. There's some cool stuff here with that. So in the midst of building the temple, they started with these sacrifices. In fact, verse 2, it talks about how they built an altar to the God of Israel to offer burnt offerings thereon, as it was written in the law of Moses, the man of God. So they started back at the very beginning with this idea of sacrifices. Verse 3, it talks about how they even burnt offerings morning and evening. So they got back to the basics of what you do every morning and every evening. Verse 5, it talks about willingly offering their free will offering to the Lord. They kept the Feast of the Tabernacle. So they went back to these sacrifices that they were used to doing. The foundation of all of this is focusing those sacrifices on Jesus Christ. That's what they were all about. But I do like the idea where it talks about their morning and evening sacrifices. Now, when you and I think about the things that we do to rebuild our lives every morning and every evening, I start thinking about the basics of prayer and the basics of scripture study. Those two things right there. I mean, really, when it comes right down to it, if you want to be able to get closer to God, you work on your daily prayers and you work on your daily scripture study. If you want to fall away from God, you start eliminating the daily prayers and the daily scripture study. Those two things are foundational, and that word is used very deliberately here. It talks about how that foundation is built right there. So when I think of the foundation, I think of that Alma 37, that daily and morning sacrifice. Alma 37:37, many of you are familiar with this verse where it says, counsel with the Lord in all thy doings, and he will direct thee for good. Yea, when thou liest down at night, there is that nighttime right there. Lie down unto the Lord, that he may watch over you in your sleep. And when thou risest in the morning, let thy heart be full of thanks unto God. There's that morning sacrifice. And simply put here, if ye do these things, ye shall be lifted up at the last day. And I really like that idea. So you're not sure where to start, go back to the basics of the prayers and the scripture reading, that daily connection with God. We know how President Nelson has really invited us to seek to daily connect ourselves with God. That is one of the very first things you can do when you're trying to rebuild a damaged, broken life. Now you go back to Ezra chapter 3 and verse number 10, it talks about how it says, when the builders had laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, they started setting priests around, and they're starting to get things back to the way they were used to it. Verse 11, they sang together by chorus and praising and giving thanks to the Lord, because he is good. His mercy endureth forever towards Israel. All the people shouted with a great shout when they praised the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. So again, when you start going through those prayers and those scripture reading, you start acknowledging the goodness of God. You start recognizing his tender mercies, and you are shouting for joy because you see how good God is. Now, the last couple verses of this chapter are awesome. Verse 12, but many of the priests and Levites and chiefs of the fathers, who were ancient men that had seen the first house. So these were guys who remembered what the original temple looked like. When the foundation of this house was laid before their eyes, they wept with a loud voice, and many shouted aloud for joy. It's funny, you got the new folks shouting for joy because they've laid the foundation. You got the old folks shouting for joy. They're crying. Verse 13, so that the people could not discern the noise of the shout of joy from the noise of the weeping of the people. For the people shouted with a loud shout, and noise was heard afar off. As they're rebuilding, they start with that foundation. When they see that foundation built, they are so excited. And so that connection with God, that morning and evening connection with God, is so crucial when you are trying to rebuild a broken and damaged life. I can't express that enough. If you feel far from God, go back to those basics and you'll see that foundation built up again, and you see those sacrifices. And it takes sacrifice to be able to do those things. It takes that time and effort to do it, but as you do it, you'll be able to feel that excitement and want to shout for joy because of the goodness of God. I know that's true. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing, and thanks for sharing these messages. We are so grateful that you guys do that. And please go check out our amazingly comfortable gospel-themed socks at bombsocks.com, and we will see you tomorrow. Godspeed. Bye-bye.